Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to Whims. And today, for my double feature stroke Bridge to Halloween series, I'm going to be talking to you about Smile 1 and Smile 2. Now, with my double features, I usually tend to do them in two parts, where usually I'll record one video. Sometimes, if I'm very running overly long, I'll separate them into two videos, but I'm going to try to make this all as one video. But the essential story of the first Smile is it came out in 2022 and it was written and directed by Parker Finn, who inspired the film on his original short film called Laura Hasn't Slept, in which a therapy patient by the name of Laura goes to a psychologist and she basically describes a dream where she sees a face staring back at her, and it could be the corpse of a friend that she knew, or it could be, a certain type of trauma that she's had to deal with. And the film kind of ends on a pretty ambiguous note, but the entire basis of that film kind of makes up the good majority of what this film's sort of building towards. And the story of Smile follows a therapist by the name of Rose Cotter, who is played by Sosie Bacon, I think her name is. She's the daughter of Kevin Bacon, and she plays a therapist named Rose Cotter. And due to a incident in her childhood where she witnessed quite a lot of traumatic things at the hands of her mother, she ends up becoming a therapist later on in life and helping patients deal with their trauma and deal with their insecurities in pretty much the same way that no one could with her. So she pretty much has been, kind of giving voice to the people who are considered voiceless or beyond hope. So when it's revealed in her practice that she's been working 80-hour days where she's just basically having little to no sleep, she ends up, being asked by one of her supervisors, you need to take at least a week off paid, a week paid day off, almost, or like a week off paid kind of thing, where you're still getting paid but you're essentially not working and you're just relaxing and just recuperating. But she says, no thank you, I'm perfectly fine, I can still do my job, I'm still very confident. But he just says, I insist. And then she goes back to her office and she gets a phone call saying that there is someone who is in urgent need of your expertise and your counselling. So she goes into the room and she meets a woman named Laura, who is completely on the verge of anxiety. She's panicking, she's shivering, she's sweating. She doesn't know what to do with herself. She's totally on the brink of desperation and madness. And she says that there is something following me, and she says to herself she knows that she's going to sound completely crazy, but she is being harassed by something that appears to be after her, and it seems to be wearing a smile, like a very broad, very kind of sinister smile, and it tends to hide behind people, both strangers and people that she knows. And it's been harassing her for a while and she's very much panicking. She doesn't know what's going on, and even in some instances this thing has appeared as her grandfather who died years ago. And that's very important because that's kind of how this creature works. It kind of it basically latches onto you after you've seen a traumatic event, and it tries to essentially follow you and basically frighten the life out of you, scare you until you're basically just an empty shell. And then when you're at your emotional lowest, that's when it comes in, and that's when it reveals itself to you and it reveals its true form, and then that's when it's able to possess you. So in many cases, Smile looks like it has a lot of the same parameters as sort of like a Lovecraft story, where the whole entire idea with a Lovecraft short story or anything like that is that essentially the whole entire idea is these ordinary people think that the world's very much great and very much, as it is, but they encounter something that's otherworldly that they can't seem to emotionally or psychologically comprehend, and their brain breaks. And that's effectively what the whole entire idea is. And often a lot of Lovecraft stories tend to end with the main characters seeing these horrific monstrosities and essentially going mad, or seeing something that essentially causes their minds to shatter, and it completely and utterly changes the game. So when Laura is explaining this story to Rose, she's very comforting. She's doing her job as a professional, like, I'm here to help you, I just want to know what's going on, who was your last therapist, and things like that. And she is saying, look, you're safe here, you're okay, nothing's going to get you, you're perfectly fine. But then randomly, when she falls over, or a vase shatters, she basically goes to go and pick it up, and then she looks at Laura and she Laura freaks out because she's obviously seen the smile, and it's like it's very horrific. And you really do feel like the actress who plays Laura in this film does a really good job of selling what kind of horror she's in, and it really is kind of horrible because you almost feel like there was an entire storyline that happened long before this scene even took place that we haven't even seen, but we can tell through this actress's performance what she's gone through. It's almost like she's come off of her own movie and she's just come into this one, and now it's all going to start again because she starts to act out, she starts to scream, and then she starts to make gurgling noises. And then Rose tries to call for help, and then she realises that her patient has gone very uncharacteristically silent. And when she looks back over at the corner that she was lying down in, she sees that Laura isn't there. And when she looks, she turns all the way around. She sees that Laura's standing there with a very sinister smile, and she is standing with a broken shard of glass, and she cuts her throat and dies right then and there with a smile on her face. And that's very chilling. First of all, what I'd like to say is that this film is very, very gory. So if you're expecting it to be kind of like a film along the lines of The Ring or something where it is basically more of a supernatural thriller, but it's more of an emphasis on scares, you're not going to get that with Smile. There's going to be a lot of blood and then there's going to be a lot of violence, and it's really going to be quite shocking. That's just a starter for 10. That doesn't even come close to how insane this film gets. So Rose finds out that she's possessed by this creature, and she has to try to figure out what's going on with this creature, how does it operate, and she has to do all of this stuff and try to figure out how to break the curse before she dies, because no one's ever lasted more than a week, and she only has a week to figure out what's going on before she eventually succumbs to the Smile curse. So when she's investigating, her entire life falls apart. She begins to lose credibility in her job. When she is going to work, she starts to, see things that aren't really there. There's a patient who continuously says things like, my family are going to die, I'm going to die. And then in a very famous scene where she's trying to comfort him, he turns to her and says, while he's grinning, you're going to die, you're going to die. And that's one of those things where her credibility starts to lose traction. But not only that, but her relationship with her fiancé is starting to go off the rails. Her relationship with her sister, which was already rocky to begin with, starts to immediately go down the drain in a very infamous scene involving her nephew's birthday party. And if you know the film, you know what scene I'm talking about. And let me just say, as soon as that cat was introduced, I thought, oh yeah, that cat's going to die. And I could almost read it off the room. It's almost like when in soap operas, when characters go, oh, we're going to get married after this very big event, and after this disaster's all over, we're going to get married, and we're going to go somewhere, and we're going to restart our lives together. You might as well hold out a sign saying, red flag, this person's going to die. And that's kind of how I feel whenever a pet is introduced in a horror movie. Like, chances are that pet is going to die at some point. And sadly, this poor pet known as Moustache is sadly horribly mutilated and used as a present for her nephew at some point. And that scene was so horrible. Not only was it really horrible for the nephew to pick up the corpse of the cat, but also it was horrible for Rose because she clearly, really loved that cat and really thought the world of Moustache. And we were all I was very sad when I saw that scene. And of course, I've got a cat now myself, so I feel very protective of animals. All of a sudden, it really does feel like it really does hurt really deeply when you see animals get hurt or get, tortured in any way in these sorts of films. So you really do get attached. But that scene was really horrible because you really do see Rose at her lowest point. And as she's investigating these series of crimes, you really do feel sorry for her. And I really do feel like Sosie Bacon, who is the actress who plays Rose, does an absolutely wonderful job in really kind of making sure because 50% of it is on the page, courtesy of Parker Finn, but 50% of it is also to do with the actress, and I feel like she does a very good job of making you care. And that's the thing that I really like about these films, is you really do care about the characters, you care about the protagonists, so that if anything bad was to happen to them, you are immediately on their side, and you want to see them get rid of it and deal with it. So she goes to all sorts of different places, and she finds out that this trauma demon, or this trauma creature, this sort of Smile creature, feeds off of your trauma, and it basically essentially it either latches on to you if you've seen a traumatic event, which is basically if you've seen someone kill themselves who also wears the smile, and if you have unfinished business, if you have any trauma that you haven't dealt with, that's literally like the seasoning on the meat, as it were. So that's literally the creature saying, oh, you taste very flavourful because you've got other traumas in your life that I can feed off of. And what it basically does is it scares you to a point of mental collapse, to the point where you're so broken so that it can basically reveal its human form and shatter your brain so that it can crawl inside you and basically overcome you. And we've seen this in various different examples, but what I really like about this film and what I like about the sequel is you learn little bits about this creature here and there. Like in this film, we find out that it can take the shape of any creature, any type of person that you know or you don't know, and it can basically just appear out of nowhere, or there can be someone who's in the room but you just other people can't see it. And that's how it attacks you, that's how it gets you off guard at first. But then, when it gets you into a place where it thinks it wants you, it can basically allow you to confront your trauma in a way where it feels very beneficial to it. Like, say, for example, at the very end of the film, big spoilers, by the way, for this film throughout the entirety, so if you haven't seen Smile, please go and watch it. It's currently on Netflix as of this recording. But please go and see this film. The original is amazing, and it's worth the price of admission alone, just for the set pieces and the scares and the great performances and things like that. But the story is good, and the story is very compelling, and the scares are really wonderful. But yeah, please go and see this film. So click off now if you haven't seen the whole of the film. But if you have, please stick around, because I will be talking about this and Smile 2. So big spoilers for Smile 1 and Smile 2. But yeah, the basic gist of the story is she eventually goes back to her childhood home after everything is basically gone badly for her, and she finally confronts her mum, who we find out was actually the victim of an accidental overdose, an unplanned overdose. And instead of actually calling for help, Rose decides to let her die. And this was probably a very problematic thing, but part of me feels like she was 10 years old and she was probably just tired of seeing her mum, because her mum is a drug addict. That's made very clear from the very get-go, that she is someone who has suffered with drug addiction, and her daughter was probably just tired of calling the ambulance and, having to deal with her shit basically all the time. But whenever she gets the chance to get brought back to life, she always ends up falling back on the way, always falling back off the horse again and going back into the drug addiction and the alcohol addiction and things like that. And she was probably just very tired, and she was very intimidated and scared of her mother. There was clearly a lot of instances of abuse in that story as well. And of course, the Smile creature assumes the shape of what her mother would look like to her at the age of 10 years old, and she's described as very tall and very kind of imposing and very frightening looking. And honestly, this creature really does a good job of remaking this character seem terrifying, even though technically it looks like a cross between Marilyn Manson from the Sweet Dreams Are Made of These video and Laura from The Evil Within, which I think is actually really interesting. But yeah, it manages to scare the living daylights out of her by showing its true form as what her mother would have looked like to her at 10 years old, which is really tall, very imposing, and it has like these very kind of long, lanky and very skinny, appendages for arms and hands and things like that. And it shows that she basically hasn't dealt with the trauma of her mother's death, and she does technically deal with it, but then the ending, spoiler alert again, by the way, big spoiler warning, it turns out that wasn't really what the Smile creature did. Or that's not what the Smile creature was meant to represent. That the Smile creature still is out there and it still wants to possess Rose. So when it feels like it's in a place of security and in a place of safety, it gets her back into the house when she's most afraid and at her most fragile and at her most broken, and it reveals its true form to her in a very creepy effect where it opens its mouth wide and then it's revealed to be like, this giant, almost kind of like Jack-in-the-Box type thing, where it sort of like stands up and it has like multiple faces, and when it opens its mouth it has like multiple tongues and multiple teeth extending out over it. There's certain posters of it in, various thumbnails for YouTube videos where it has like endless mouths and endless smiles. And it basically shows her this so that she can freak out and it can possess her, and it does it in a very creepy way where it opens her mouth very wide and it just starts to crawl in. And that part for me was like, oh no, 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 no. And it was like really horrible. But yes, that moment really shows that. And a lot of people might say that's not very good for its commentary, which is meant to be about how you tackle trauma and all the rest of it. But to a certain degree, it doesn't necessarily break the film. I personally wasn't a huge fan of this ending because I felt like Rose was such a compelling character to the point where I felt like when she did eventually succumb to her trauma and she wasn't able to deal with it, it was sad and it was horrible to listen to. It was horrible to see because you really do feel like you've grown attached to the character, so that when she does confront her demons and she does give it that big whack with the lantern and it bursts into flames, you're thinking to yourself, that's her way of confronting this demon and confronting her trauma, and you're really proud of her after that. You're thinking to yourself, you finally did it, you made, that thing pay. But in reality, that's not how trauma works. You can't just... I think what the film is trying to say is even though you can confront your trauma and you can deal with it, it's not just going to go away. Your trauma will always be there. Your trauma will always be there in the basement of your home, in certain places, wherever you go, in your little private moments. You're always going to be confronted with that trauma that you've been dealing with. I think the better example of this kind of ending, where it is trying to say that, look, your trauma isn't over, is the film The Babadook by Jennifer Kent. I feel like she did a much better job of highlighting that, yes, you overcame the nightmare, but the monster is still down there, the trauma is still down there, your depression and your anxiety and your emotional issues are still there. Like, they're still there in the basement that you have to feed every once in a while and give light to, but you can't let it overcome you and overtake your life like it did at the beginning of that film. And that's how it could have been communicated, but I feel like because the first film wanted to really give us a really good shock ending, that was how they did it. But I can see why a lot of people would misread that ending. But I feel like what that ending is trying to say is that even though you've confronted your trauma, which is what Rose did with her mother, she didn't stop the demon because the demon was still after her. Her trauma with her mum was just the start of a 10, as it were. So I feel like that was just one hurdle to a much more bigger boss. It's like when you're watching or you're playing a boss battle in a video game and you think you've defeated the creature and you think you've dealt with it and you think like, yes, I've dealt with this first hurdle, but then, oh no, it has a second phase. It's that kind of thing, but except Rose doesn't have any weapons. She's kind of spent all her bullets, as it were, or spent all of her, melee weapons and things like that, and she now has nothing to do except, just be overcome with, trauma and anxiety and fear more predominantly. And it's really well done, and I really do think it's an amazing, amazing ending when you think of it like that. But what I think is very important is that this film is still good, it still has great scares, and it doesn't feel like... It utilises jump scares a lot, but I don't think this film does it in a place where it feels like it will go quite, bang, and then immediately it's like someone going, hi, how are you, and all that sort of stuff. It's not that kind of fake out jump scares. A lot of the jump scares in this film are genuinely real scares that do keep you on the edge and do keep you kind of going, oh my god, I'm really terrified, I'm really paranoid. But that's what's really brilliant about it, is it really still keeps the scare factor up to 11, even though technically it still utilises those jump scares that a lot of people are tired of. And Parker Finn manages to utilise them in a very creative way where he still keeps the tension very firmly tight. And that leads us to Smile 2. And Smile 2 is a good sequel. I do think it's a good sequel in regards to where it decides to go, because the whole entire film, it has a prologue to it has sort of like a prologue that kind of highlights what happened to one character in the first film again. But it's very small, and I think it's going to be a very interesting compendium or a very interesting companion to the first film in that regard. But after that prologue, which is a really good one-take shot, effectively, the story begins proper, and we follow a pop star by the name of Sky Riley. And she's a pop star who has undergone some very troubled times. She's dealt with drug addiction, and she's dealt with alcohol addiction, and she's dealt with a lot of difficult things, including losing her boyfriend in a car accident. And she's had a long hiatus where she's just been doing nothing, but she's now released a comeback tour where she's going to reconnect with her fans and basically give them a great big concert that they can all be proud of. So when this happens, she ends up, getting ready for the tour, but then she realises that she's lost her final bit of medication that she needs to keep herself at equilibrium when she's on stage and when she's resting. So she goes to an old friend who happens to be a drug dealer that also dispenses in medication. But when she arrives there, he's absolutely paranoid. His name is Lewis, and he basically threatens her with a samurai sword, thinking that she is one of the Smile entities. And when he's out there, he says to her that, he's going to get her a medication, it's okay. But then she waits there, and she waits there, and she waits there, and he's not coming out. So when she goes to try to find him, he basically panics and screams. And then he says, what do you want? Get away from me, get away from me. And then he gets possessed by the Smile creature again. Only, instead of like Laura in the first film, where she cuts her throat with a bit of a broken vase, he actually grabs like the dung bale of a weight, and he like slams it against his face. And what's really kind of brutal about this one is, unlike the first one where it was very painful and very sharp, you could almost say that it was very quick. She probably died very quickly. In this one, it's very slow, and there's a lot of use of blunt objects in this film, and it's really brutal. And what I really like about this one's really twisted, because it really does feel like Parker Finn in an interview said that weight scene was supposed to be kind of like a very twisted game of peekaboo, where it was like every single time he sort of like launches the weight up against his face, it almost pulls it back, and then you can see little bits of damage here and there, like a cut across his forehead, and then you sort of like see a bit of his skin flip off, and then you can see like his whole face is sort of like bloodied and things like that. So every single time he lifts the thing up, the damage gets worse the further and further away he pulls it back. And it's such a very grisly death, but it really does a good job of both being kind of obviously very traumatizing and very terrifying, but there's also an element of humour in there. There's almost a little bit of an element of dark humour in that as well. And I feel that this is the time where Parker Finn is really having fun with the concept, and really just kind of say, well, look, let's play around with this and see what we can do. And what I really like about this character of Sky Riley is she is a character who wants to move on, and she wants to give something back to her fans. So she's really working hard to not only give her fans some of the songs that she really loves and that the fans really love, like New Brain or Blood and White Satin, or any of these other songs like Death of Me and things like that, all these other songs. And by the way, the soundtrack to this film is amazing. I literally bought the soundtrack on YouTube, and I actually have been listening to it for ages. It's such a good soundtrack. I love it. I would highly recommend it if you're a huge fan of, those pop concert icons like Lady Gaga or Ariana Grande or anything like that. If you're interested, or Taylor Swift or any of those other sorts of pop singers where they have these very kind of eccentric, very kind of stylized pop personas, you'll highly love this soundtrack, because it does feel like it has that flavour, or something along the lines of something that Selena Gomez would have made back in the day when she was doing the pop star thing. There's a lot of that going on, and I really do think the soundtrack's amazing. But what we find out in this film is that the Smile Demon has a way of distorting people's realities, because there's a whole entire recurring story where she basically is trying to get in touch with an old friend of hers named Gemma, who they didn't part on good terms initially when they first, broke away. They said a lot of very harsh words, and then at a point of desperation, Naomi's character of Sky decides to keep in touch with her and try to get in touch and say that, look, I'm sorry I was such a bitch, can you please come back to my apartment? I need some company. I don't want to feel alone. And she does. She answers eventually, and she says, yeah, of course I'll come and see you. It's been a long time. But then, as things go on, you realise that something doesn't seem quite right. And what I really like about that is it really does give you this impression that it kind of gives you this impression that how much of this is actually real, and how much of this is inside the head of the main character, or how much of it is the Smile Demon actually fucking with her, for lack of a better word. And I really do like that. I like the idea that you really don't know if she's completely in control of her reality, or whether she's completely given herself over to the Smile Demon already. It really is completely unclear. It's very well done. But what I really like about this film is it gives you a little bit more of an insight into the Smile Demon as a character, because not only does he screw with people's realities and really kind of blur the line between when reality exists and when you're in sort of like a hallucination, or when you're in a sort of like psychogenic fugue almost. But what's very interesting is it tends to reveal more of itself through Sky's character, because there's that very famous moment in the trailer where you see all those people kind of like crawling along in that narrow hallway across the mirrored walls, and they're like, grabbing hold of each other. That's almost like the way a spider moves, in how they, when they all come together and they're all sort of like forming an entire body almost of people, and they reach out and they're trying to grab her. That felt like a spider, trying to catch its prey. And I felt like, what if this thing is a more arachnid type character? And that does kind of highlight into what I said earlier, where it feels like a Lovecraft homage, where this thing is a cosmic entity that's probably existed for thousands of years and will probably exist for thousands of more years, and has basically lived off people's fears, lived off people's anxieties and traumas, and basically used that against them, to the point where they literally are so overcome with emotion and trauma that they literally can't do anything but allow it to take them over. And that's kind of how it happens, because when you see the Smile Demon in its true form in this film, it looks like a spider, like its hands are literally out like this, and it's literally looking at her, and it's literally like, tilting its head, and it's got that long neck, sort of like a Jack-in-the-Box type thing, with all the mouths and all the tongues and everything like that. But then it's also got those big hands, almost like a Dark Souls boss, or almost like a Bloodborne boss, where it's almost like this very fleshy, very kind of bloodied looking, viscera covered creature. And it really is almost, arachnid like or spider like in how it's presented. So this gives me the impression that this cosmic entity is some sort of spider creature, almost along the lines of Anansi in West Indian culture, where it's kind of like Anansi is meant to be kind of like the spider god of mischief, who is in shows like American Gods and things like that, where he is basically meant to be this trickster. He's meant to be a character with a spider body, but then he also has the head of a human and the body of a human. That I thought was very interesting. It almost feels like that's sort of like what it's supposed to be, sort of like a riff on a West Indian type, or Jamaican type, or Caribbean type, creature known as an Anansi or god, who is basically using this mischief and trauma to basically fuck with people and screw them over. But in reality, it's basically doing it for self-preservation or its own entertainment. It's kind of like almost like a much more, interesting riff on, other entities like that, like It from Stephen King's It, or Pennywise, and all the rest of it. There's so many interesting ways in which you could look at it, and I think that's really well done. And what I really like about this film is when the character of Gemma is welcomed back into Sky's life, there's a moment where she literally just decides to break away, and she decides to go and meet this person who seems to know a lot about the creature, even though he never got the curse, but he knows someone who did, and he knows that someone spoke about it. But here's the thing, how can you know what this thing is if you haven't actually been experienced of it, or if you haven't experienced it? And it is actually really interesting, because it does give away something that I thought was actually quite a plot hole at first, because this person who was supposed to be speaking supposedly died of the smile curse, but apparently he's now someone who hasn't been infected by it, but he has the same name. I can't remember what the name was, but I really did find myself thinking, wow, this is actually a very interesting retcon. I wonder why this is. But then when the twist happens, it makes perfect sense. The smile creature has been literally filling her head with these hallucinations, and they do give little hints to it throughout the film as well, like the scene where there's this really great scene where it's a flashback to her during her drug-addled moments, and her and her boyfriend, played by Jack Nicholson's son, are basically having an argument, and it's all very intimate shot, it's all very closed in, and the camera's just flashing back or revolving back and forth between her and her boyfriend. It's escalating to the point where she literally goes crazy, and then she literally grabs the steering wheel, and then she sort of like falls off the road into these into a forest and in through these trees. And it's sort of like the trees sort of break away to reveal her in the hospital bed, and she sort of like wakes up. And I thought that was a very great way of, not only was it a great transition and showing that it was a dream, but it was also a great way of hinting at this could potentially be another hallucination again. And I thought that was very clever, and I feel like there's so many good things in this film, and I feel like a lot of people are basically saying it's good, but it's more of the same with, the smile creature, and I will be inclined to agree with you, but I feel like for what it does that's similar, it does a lot of things different that could be fed into and said that, oh yeah, this could be hinting at what the smile creature is supposed to be, or this is a new power that it has, or how it's able to influence people to have its reality distorted. There's so many ways in which you could look at it. But before I sign off on this video, I thought these films were great. I really do love the Smile films, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Parker Finn does next. But before I sign off on this video, I'm going to give another little bit of news in regards to what Parker Finn could potentially be in the works for doing next. And it's to do with the last film review that I did, which was Possession, which I uploaded yesterday. And Possession is a 1981 film about a couple whose marriage is slowly in a decline. And it's basically a very surrealist look at the breaking down of a marriage. It's also about relationships in general, and how much of yourself, how much of your own identity gets lost and restructured and reshaped when you become a parent, or when you become, a father or a mother, and all those sorts of things. So I thought that was a very interesting thing for him to tackle next, if he is in the talks for doing it. But what I think he should do, and this is very crucial, is I don't think he should adapt the story as it originally was back in 1981. I think if he's going to do that, he should do the Possession type route with a different type of character and a different type of narrative. I think he should do it from the point of view of a student or a high schooler, and have it be about, someone who is dealing with a lot of struggles in high school, dealing with, body dysmorphia, dealing with all sorts of different things, all sorts of psychological issues, and them not knowing how to deal with it, and maybe talk about social media and do all these other things. Like, do it from the point of view of a student, or do it from the point of view of a family who has a teenager who feels like their life is going down the pan and they don't know what to do, but they've also got this great future ahead of them, but they feel like they're pressured by their parents and they're pressured by their friends. There's so many things that you could play with the idea of possession. Like, when you become a student, when you become a high schooler, how much of you remains when it's over? That's the kind of thing that you could play with, and I think that would be a very good premise for a remake. Don't adapt Mark and Anna's story, don't retell it, because we've already got a good version of that story already. Do it from a different perspective. Just have the name Possession, because you can still have the name Possession and still do a different story, because the whole entire idea with Possession in that film was that it isn't just simply someone losing a sense of their self-control, but it's also the sense of how much value do you put into yourself, how much value do you put into your possessions, the things that you own, the people that are in your life, and how much of yourself do you see in other people, the people that you know, your friends, family, and all of it, how much of them are counting on you. There's so many ways in which you could look at it, and I think if Parker Finn is going to do it, tell a different story. Don't tell Mark and Anna's story, tell a different story. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. This has been my double feature review for Smile 1 and Smile 2. I hope you enjoyed it. And in the comments, please let me know what you guys think of these films. Have you seen both these films? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts, comment below and let me know. And if you like what you see here, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up. And please be sure to subscribe for more videos. And I will be doing more stand-up next, not this Friday, but next Friday my next stand-up show will be, so look forward to that next Friday. And I hope you're all having a very good day. This has been Josh with Whims. Take care, bye bye for now.